I'm Thomas Fernández. I'm an artist for Santa Cruz, and today we're talking about the Winkowski sketchbook. I've done the aquatic, the birdcage, the sketchbook, the spaced out, and then there's another 3 that haven't come out yet, that we're not finished with yet. So it'll be, what, 7 or so? 7 or 8? Typically, making a graphic for Erick starts with him reaching out to us with either an idea or some sketches, and we kind of go back and forth from there. I'll usually do just some really small, loose thumbnails of that idea, and I'll try to provide a few different options for that same idea. So it's like, okay, here's what you're asking for, but here's 3 different ways to do what you're asking for. Send them back to him, see which one he likes, and then at that point, I'll draw it a little bigger, like regular size piece of paper, kind of get the details a little more in order, and then just double check again, like, hey, is this cool? Is there anything else you want in here? Anything else changed? And then at that point, once we get the okay, I'll draw it like 2 size of his board or bigger. Erick will have like a pretty solid idea, and it really is kind of like, okay, he wants this thing with these other elements in there, so how do you go about fitting that all together in a way that flows and like looks naturally and actually looks like a skateboard graphic? Because it has to fit on this weird specific shape. It's not just like a drawing, it has to be functional. You gotta make sure like that the trucks aren't gonna cover parts of the graphic that are integral. You have to work in his name, and you gotta work in some Santa Cruz branding. So there's a lot of like moving parts and boxes you need to check in order to make it a successful graphic. And it's just like a real kind of meticulous, slow process. Tough to nail down like a specific set of steps to do it, because they're always different depending on what the board is or what the graphic is. But it's a lot of keeping it loose and slowly refining it and working it in and just tightening it up until you have something that looks like a finished graphic. I personally like the collaborative aspect to it. And that's something maybe I've kind of taken from like my time tattooing, is I'm used to somebody coming in with like an idea or a loose sketch, and then it's my job to turn it into something a little more realized. A lot of times people think like for an artist, you can do whatever you want. That's not always like ideal. Sometimes it's nice to have some parameters. It's a little easier to be creative when you have some kind of limitation sometimes. So working with a writer like that who's like, hey, I want a board with some aquatic animals or something, like an underwater scene, that's like a perfect jumping off point to then get to have some fun and draw all the things that need to go with it. Because it is a board for a pro. So it's cool to know that that pro is involved to a certain extent, and they're stoked on it, and they feel like their voice and their personality is also in it. I don't want to just draw something and do a board that I think is cool. I want to make sure the pro that it's for is like gonna be hyped on it when they see it. To me, Santa Cruz has a pretty iconic style or like aesthetic. From Jim Phillips and the Phillips Studios artists, to me, that's what I think of when I think of a Santa Cruz board. So I want to make sure that even though I'm the artist, that I'm paying enough tribute and making graphics that look appropriate for Santa Cruz. Even if you don't see the tail hit that says Santa Cruz, I want to make sure that the style of art to somebody at a skate shop can visually see that and know it's a Santa Cruz board. The other thing too, I think, with like having to keep up and like with there's so many boards out there and so many different graphics and writers, one thing that Santa Cruz is really good about that helps us stand out in the landscape of all the other skateboard companies is that we are really focused on telling stories and telling the writer stories. So I try to put a lot of effort into the ideation process and just the concepts we're doing. it's like, okay, he wants an alien, but let's put this other kind of narrative to it, and let's have this kind of story in it, and we'll put some symbolism. It still is a cool drawing of an alien, but the more you look at it, the more things you'll notice, and then you'll realize that there's some kind of a story going on there. A lot of it too is like telling the story of the writer or something personal to them. There's a happy medium where the writer can have a graphic that is very personal to them and whatever ideas they want to express, but then also in the end it's going to be like a cool image. Somebody who doesn't know those specifics of the writer will just see a rad board, and then people that do know and the writer will go look at it and go like, oh yeah, here's all this personal stuff to me in it, you know? So it's kind of like an everybody wins situation. Starting from getting the idea to doing some very small thumbnails, to having the writer pick a direction, to expanding on it, asking for feedback, expanding on it further, getting approval, doing a final clean drawing of it, and then once the thumbs up are all there, taking some major time to do the inking, which is like very slow, but I feel like that's also an important part of Santa Cruz's heritage, is like hand-inked graphics. And then after that point, you know, scanning it, making it digital, laying out all the colors, there's back and forth there to make sure it all fits in relation to other boards in the line, to make sure it fits with what the writer's thinking. And then from there, we'll go through the process of making it all layered properly and formatted for print. And then after that, it's like layers of presentations and approval and selling and this and that, and sending it to the factory and getting samples back, and then approving samples or potentially asking for revisions and waiting for more. We'll do a graphic and then we send it out, and it's about a year or so until we actually have the finished board that people can skate. I would say it's usually around a month of pretty consistent work to get to like a finished graphic. But ultimately, when we get that finished board, you just get so stoked to like see it fully realized, and see videos of people like Erick then, you know, doing a ho-ho or something, and you see the board and the graphic underneath. Definitely makes it worth it. You want to do something that they're going to be stoked on. Like, I'm going to do my best I can no matter what, but I really want to make the writer happy. Some writers that are like really specific, or they kind of want to direct the art, and that's like fine, but I think that's probably the hard part, is like I just want to make sure ultimately that writer, when they get their board, they're going to be fired up to go rip, you know? Not like they get it and like, oh, it's cool, whatever. I mean, there's been ones that have been difficult for certain reasons, but I would say a lot of the ones that I've done for Kevin Braun are like super detail heavy. I actually have this one that I got back from a museum show that it was in, and it's like so tweaky, and it just took forever to do, because it's like I wanted to serve the idea properly, and in order to do that, it just had to be an obscene amount of detail. Just the tiny microscopic little leaves on the trees and everything, like all the food, like down to making sure all the ants on the food have the appropriate amount of legs. Something like that is time consuming, and it forces me to push myself to work harder. It's a challenge in that sense. But again, like I enjoy what I'm doing, like even though it's work, it's still, I get to be an artist for a living, like that's the best. So it's all worth it ultimately. My favorite part of it is the fact that the graphic itself is telling the story of how we make graphics with Erick. I also really love that we have Erick's actual sketches throughout these boards, like in the background on those loose sheets of paper. I think that's really cool. There's 3 different variants. The only differences are the sketchbook pages. So each one has a different collection of drawings that Erick did from his past sketchbooks. And I think just based on how they're putting them in stores, how you get them is how you get them. You don't have the option to pick. So if you really want all 3, you gotta kind of hit the skate shops and hunt down the ones that are out there. I really love his drawings, and I would love to see more of them, like used in graphics. It's just really cool to get a look into his like personality and in his brain, essentially, because he's such a unique, creative individual, and you can kind of just tell he's kind of on his own trip, and he sees the world his own way, and he's living at his own pace, and he's doing things the way he wants to do them. And I think that's why he's such a like prolific person and an amazing skateboarder. The fact that he's riding a shaped board too and doing all these tricks and, you know, kind of referencing 80s skateboarding, which I really love that era of it, but it also feels very modern and uniquely himself. You know, he's not somebody who's stuck in the past. He's just somebody that can incorporate aspects of it into his current vernacular of skating. It's cool to get to collaborate with him in this way and like help tell his story through his graphics. It's cool too, like going through his sketches and seeing not only drawings from him that inspired graphics that I worked on, but other graphics in his collection, like seeing the little raccoon drawing that's like, oh, that's what his raccoon board came from, or seeing little things he drew that like inspired the Dope Planet series. It's pretty cool. Well, I think a big thing that I took away from actually looking through Erick's sketchbooks is that I kind of personally realized that I don't really draw in sketchbooks like I used to when I was a kid. I feel like when you're younger, you draw for fun. Like I would have a sketchbook and a pen and keep it with me, and it's like, oh, mom's gotta go run errands, I'm gonna sit in the car and draw. And like that's how you would entertain yourself, is like you would draw for fun. Being a professional artist, I haven't made as much time as I'd like to just draw for the sake of drawing. So after doing this, I got my own like smaller size sketchbook and got some new pens, and I'm like, okay, at least like once or twice a week, I'm gonna take an hour to just like doodle and have fun and just like draw for something that's not for a project or for work. I can thank Erick for that. Definitely inspired me. He's just a cool dude.